My parents kicked me out at 18. Your sister deserves the future, not you. I was sick and homeless. 5 years later, my sister walked into my office and I said, "We are here to discuss your qualifications." When I was 18, my parents handed me a crumpled $20 bill and said, "Your sister deserves the future, not you." No whisper, no hesitation, just a verdict delivered in the pouring rain. My father's voice was cold steel. My mother's hand trembled once, then went still, and the front door clicked shut behind me like the world had decided I wasn't worth keeping. I stood there on that porch, soaked to the bone, my suitcase growing heavy at my feet, watching the porch light flicker and die above me. 5 years later, that same cold judgment would flicker again. Only this time, I was the one behind the mahogany desk. And my sister was the one asking for a chance. But before I tell you how that circle closed, let me take you back to where it all began. Our house in Springfield always smelled like vanilla air freshener and motor oil, my mother's obsession with keeping up appearances, and my father's with maintaining control. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. Inside, we were a quiet hierarchy, with my sister Vanessa perched firmly on top and me somewhere below the bottom rung. Dad, Richard Porter, ran a modest auto repair shop after leaving his accounting firm. He believed that sweat was the only proof of worth. Mom, Patricia, kept the family finances like she kept her emotions, in neat columns with no room for error or weakness. And Vanessa? She was their golden child. Beautiful, articulate, a communications major with a smile that could light up a stadium. Every compliment in that house curved toward her like gravity bending light to its source. I learned early that my place was the folding chair at the edge of the dining table. Metal, cold, unsteady legs. Easy to pack away when company came. When Vanessa turned 16, she got a used Nissan with a giant red bow on the hood. I got a Barnes & Noble gift card. Mom said, "You love reading, right?" I said, "Thank you," pretending the words didn't burn my throat. But the day that envelope arrived, the one with the navy blue university seal, I believed for just a second that the script might finally change. I had worked after school, tutored neighborhood kids, fixed broken appliances for spare cash, anything to save money for college. When I tore that envelope open and saw the word congratulations, I thought maybe, just maybe, they would finally see me. That evening I stood in our kitchen holding the acceptance letter like a flag of victory. "I got into Illinois State," I said, my voice shaking with hope. "They gave me a partial scholarship. It's not full coverage, but—" Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "We can't afford 2 tuitions," he said flatly, like he was discussing the weather. Mom sighed, sorting bills on the granite counter. "Vanessa's program at Northwestern is already expensive. You'll have to be realistic, Rachel." Realistic? The word hit me like a slap. "I've worked for this," I said, my voice rising. "I can cover the rest with loans and part-time work." Dad set his paper down. His voice turned razor sharp. "Then cover all of it. You're 18 now. Time to be independent." Vanessa's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down at it, smiled at whatever message had appeared, then said softly without looking up, "She's being dramatic." That word, dramatic, was the fuse that lit everything. I had swallowed their silence, their favoritism, their indifference for years. But that night, standing in that kitchen with my acceptance letter crumpling in my shaking hands, I finally said what I'd never dared to say. "You've never even asked what I want. Not once." The kitchen went completely still. Mom's hand trembled once before she reached into her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and pressed it into my palm like it was a generous gift. "Be independent," she said coldly. Dad never looked up again. I packed that night, one suitcase, a few notebooks, my acceptance letter folded carefully in my jacket pocket. When I walked out into the rain, Vanessa stood at the living room window, her reflection blurred against the glass like a ghost. She didn't wave. That's how it began. With a door closing and the sound of thunder swallowing my name. The first night alone, I learned exactly how cold metal can feel. The bus stop bench was slick with rain, and the $20 bill in my pocket was already damp and wrinkled. Every car that passed splashed water on me, making me feel smaller with each wave. I kept staring at my acceptance letter, watching the ink start to blur, the words trying desperately to still mean something. By midnight, the streetlights buzzed and flickered like they were shivering too. I told myself I'd figure it out, find a job, find a room, find anything. But the truth was, I didn't even have an address to write on an application form. I was officially nowhere. By the third night, my body started to betray me. Fever crept in. My chest felt tight. The air hurt going into my lungs. I remember a man's voice cutting through the hum of passing traffic. "Hey, you okay there?" He was maybe in his 50s, salt and pepper hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His name was Walter Green, a long-haul truck driver who'd stopped at the gas station across the street for coffee. He gave me his jacket, called 911, and stayed until the ambulance arrived, holding my hand and telling me it would be okay. The hospital lights were too bright, too sterile. A nurse clipped a plastic band around my wrist. Name, Rachel Porter. Address, unknown. That word, unknown, hit harder than the pneumonia diagnosis. When I woke up 2 days later, there was a styrofoam cup of apple juice on the tray beside my bed and a $20 bill tucked neatly underneath it. The nurse told me the truck driver had left it. "Said you'd need it more than he does," she explained with a sad smile. They discharged me with antibiotics, a pamphlet for Harmony House shelter, and nowhere to go. Harmony House sat wedged between a coin laundry and a pawn shop, peeling yellow paint, flickering neon sign, but warmth inside. The woman who ran it, Dorothy Kane, looked at me the way no one had in a long time, straight in the eye, seeing me as a person, not a problem. "You get one bed, one locker, one chance to rebuild," she said firmly. "That's all we ask." So I cleaned floors. I folded donated sheets. I scrubbed bathrooms until my hands cracked from bleach. But the work felt like proof that I existed, that I mattered. The other women at the shelter called me the quiet one. I kept my head down, saved meal vouchers, collected job flyers from the community board. One afternoon, Dorothy pinned a handwritten note to the bulletin board. "Help wanted. Morrison's Diner, Oak Street and Fifth Avenue." It was the kind of ad most people walk past without reading. But I saw it and thought, maybe this is where everything changes. The next morning, I walked there in borrowed sneakers that were half a size too big. The diner smelled like strong coffee and hash browns, the kind of place that didn't pretend to be anything fancy. Behind the counter stood Gloria Morrison, sleeves rolled up, hair streaked with gray, flour on her apron. She glanced at me once, took in my thrift store jacket and the faded hospital bracelet still on my wrist. "You ever wait tables?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm a fast learner." She tossed me a green apron without another word. "Good. Start with refilling those ketchup bottles. If you last the week, I'll put you on the schedule." That night, as I wiped down the counter and listened to rain tapping against the windows, I realized something important. Silence doesn't have to mean defeat. Sometimes it's just the sound of someone rebuilding, one quiet step at a time. Days at Morrison's Diner bled together in the best possible way. Mornings thick with the smell of bacon and maple syrup. Nights echoing with the hiss of the espresso machine and the clink of silverware. My arms ached. My feet developed blisters that turned to calluses. But for the first time in my life, exhaustion felt clean. It was mine. I had earned it. Gloria Morrison didn't waste words. She'd correct me without looking up. "Customer at table 6 needs a refill. People notice when you're not paying attention." Her tone was rough around the edges, but her eyes carried a quiet respect that grew as I stopped making excuses and started anticipating problems before they happened. Each shift, I watched how the place actually worked. Who came in when, which orders took longest to prepare, which supplies ran low first. I realized that chaos had patterns if you paid close enough attention. By my second week, I started reorganizing during slow periods. Salt and pepper shakers refilled by section, condiments rotated by expiration date, invoices sorted by supplier. I kept everything documented in a cheap spiral notebook I tucked in my apron pocket, tracking patterns like a detective. One morning, a delivery truck backed into the alley, late as usual. The driver, Kevin Torres, jumped out humming under his breath. "Sorry, construction on the highway," he called out, wheeling crates through the back door. I helped him unload, eggs here, flour there, perishables up front in the walk-in cooler. He watched me organize everything with purpose, then grinned. "You always arrange stuff like that?" "Makes it easier to find things later," I shrugged. "You've got a head for logistics," he said. "That's rare." It was the first compliment I'd received that didn't feel like charity or pity. That night, I stayed after closing, sketching a better delivery schedule on napkins, lines connecting suppliers, circles marking peak times, arrows showing optimal routes. When Gloria found my diagrams on the counter the next morning, she studied them for a long moment, her calloused fingers tracing my notes. "You did this?" I nodded, suddenly nervous. She folded the napkins carefully and slipped them into her apron pocket. "Keep thinking like this. The world runs on chaos, Rachel. People like you are the ones who keep it moving." Weeks became months. The diner became my classroom in business and survival. I built spreadsheets on the shelter's ancient desktop computer, tracking supply flow, mapping delivery routes, calculating labor hours. When Kevin's truck broke down one Tuesday, I rearranged the entire week's deliveries over the phone, calling in favors and finding alternative suppliers. Everything arrived on time. He started calling me the human calculator. It made me laugh, but it also made something shift inside me. Maybe I wasn't just rebuilding my life, maybe I was designing it from scratch. When Riverside Logistics opened a position for a dispatch coordinator, Kevin brought me the printed job posting himself. "You'd be perfect for this," he said, tapping the paper. I hesitated. "They won't hire someone without a college degree." "Try anyway," he insisted. "You've got something better than a degree. You've got instinct." So I did. I printed a resume on Gloria's office printer. 2 pages that smelled faintly of coffee and determination. The hiring manager, Tom Bradford, was a no-nonsense man in his 40s who asked practical questions. How do you handle conflicts? How do you prioritize under pressure? How do you manage multiple urgent deadlines? I answered honestly, pulling from real experiences at the diner, no embellishments, no corporate jargon, just truth. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with sharp eyes. "You've got no degree," he said slowly, "but you've got something most college graduates don't have: practical problem-solving skills. We can work with that." That single sentence changed the trajectory of my entire life. At Riverside Logistics, I finally learned what control felt like: systems, routes, data that made sense. The world suddenly had structure, and I could read it like a language I'd been born to speak. Within a year, I wasn't just following routes anymore. I was redesigning them, fixing inefficiencies that veteran employees had accepted as unavoidable. That was the moment I truly understood. I didn't need a seat at their table. I was building an entire network of my own. It took 5 years to turn that diner notebook into an empire. Summit Operations Group started as nothing more than a borrowed desk in a drafty office above a copy shop on the outskirts of Chicago. Just me, a secondhand laptop, and a dream that most people would have called delusional. Every invoice I processed, every client call I took, every sleepless night I powered through, each one was another brick in the wall between who I'd been and who I was becoming. By 23, that wall had a skyline view. Summit Operations Group specialized in teaching small and medium-sized businesses how to run like industry giants: fair wages, efficient systems, zero wasted potential. We streamlined supply chains, optimized workforce scheduling, and implemented data-driven decision-making processes. My team grew from just me to 15 brilliant people who believed in the mission. I kept 3 things framed on my office wall: the hospital wristband that read "Unknown Address," the wrinkled $20 bill my mother had pressed into my hand, and our company logo between them. Together, they told the story of where I'd been and what it had cost to get here. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at the office early, reviewed quarterly reports, and prepared for afternoon interviews. My HR director, Natalie Shaw, appeared at my door with her tablet, her expression professional but warm. "New candidate for the operations coordinator position," she said, scrolling through the file. "Strong background. 3 years in corporate communications and logistics coordination." She paused, squinting at the screen with slight confusion. "Name's Vanessa Porter." For one frozen second, I thought I'd misheard her. Then the air in my office seemed to shift, heavier somehow, charged with history. I didn't look up from my desk. I just said calmly, "Schedule her for Thursday afternoon." Thursday arrived with steady rain, soft and rhythmic against the floor-to-ceiling windows. I came in early, straightened the papers on my desk obsessively, then found myself staring at that framed $20 bill. The ink had faded to a ghostly green, but the memory behind it remained sharp as broken glass. At 2 o'clock exactly, Natalie knocked once before opening my door. "She's here. Send her in." I heard the click of heels on polished hardwood, that same confident rhythm I'd once envied when she used to walk down our hallway in Springfield, basking in our parents' undivided attention. When the door opened, Vanessa stepped inside looking polished and professional, hair styled the exact way Mom used to do it for her college presentations, wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my first month's rent at the shelter. She smiled politely, the practiced smile of someone who'd spent years in communications. "Good afternoon." "Afternoon," I replied evenly. "Please, have a seat." She didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. To her, I was just another corporate executive. She had no idea she was sitting across from the sister they'd thrown away like garbage. Natalie made the formal introduction, completely unaware of the history bleeding into every corner of this room. "This is Ms. Rachel Porter, founder and CEO of Summit Operations Group." The name, our shared last name, landed between us like a spark hitting gasoline. Vanessa blinked, and I saw a small tremor pass through her perfectly manicured fingers as she adjusted the folder in her lap. "Porter," she echoed softly, uncertainty creeping into her voice. I gestured calmly toward the leather chair across from my desk. "Let's begin." Her resume was solid on paper. I had to give her that much. 3 years at a mid-sized PR firm handling client relations and project coordination. She spoke confidently about team management, deadline pressures, and stakeholder communication. Every word was rehearsed, every answer polished to perfection. This was a mask she'd clearly worn for years. I listened in silence, letting the gaps between her sentences stretch until she began to shift uncomfortably in her seat. Her confidence was starting to crack at the edges. Finally, I leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about a time you had to handle a conflict involving fairness." She hesitated for just a beat too long. "Well, at my previous company, there was a situation where 2 team members both wanted the same project. I had to mediate and make sure everyone got what they deserved based on merit." I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "Fairness," I repeated, my tone carefully measured. "That's an interesting concept. What does fairness mean to you?" She met my gaze directly, that first real flicker of confusion crossing her features. "It means making sure everyone has an equal opportunity, that no one gets special treatment." "Everyone," I said quietly. "Equal opportunity for everyone?" "Yes," she said quickly, almost defensively. "Everyone deserves the same chance." The word hung there in the air between us, sharp, unsteady, fragile. Then her eyes drifted past me to the wall behind my desk. I watched her take in the frames, the hospital wristband, the $20 bill, the company logo. I saw the exact moment recognition dawned like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. Her breath caught audibly. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as paper. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Rachel? The sound of my name from her mouth felt both foreign and painfully familiar, like hearing a song you'd forgotten you once knew by heart. I leaned back in my chair, maintaining perfect composure. We're here to discuss your qualifications for this position, I said evenly. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Her hands trembled as she slowly closed the folder on her lap, all pretense of professional confidence shattered. I didn't know, she stammered. They said you just disappeared, that you'd left and didn't want anything to do with us anymore. I survived, I finished quietly, my voice steady. Is that what they told you? That I chose to leave? Her eyes filled with tears. We were told you wanted to be independent, that you'd made your choice. I held up one hand, cutting her off with a small gesture. This isn't about the past, Ms. Porter. This is a professional setting. Let's keep it that way. She swallowed hard, desperately trying to regain her footing. You've done incredibly well for yourself, she managed, her voice shaking. So have you, I said softly, with just the slightest edge. You've learned how to sound sincere when you need to. The room went silent except for the rain whispering its secrets against the glass windows. The weight of 5 years pressed down between us. I didn't mean, she started. I raised my hand again. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. Anger was a luxury I couldn't afford back then, so I built something instead. I built this. Her tears broke then, quick and quiet, rolling down her cheeks. Mom and Dad, she whispered. They miss you. They've been looking for you. They regret everything that happened. I studied her carefully, every piece of our old hierarchy replaying in my mind like a film reel. Her brand new Nissan with the red bow. My second-hand gift card. Her college fund. My $20 bill and a slammed door. They made their choices, I said finally, my voice calm but firm. And so did you. Vanessa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I didn't stop them that night. I should have said something. I should have. You didn't have to, I interrupted. That's the thing about silence, Vanessa. It's complicity dressed up as comfort. You stood at that window and watched me leave in the rain. You made your choice then. She nodded slowly, the weight of 5 years of guilt pressing down on her shoulders. After a long moment, she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Are you going to hire me? I looked down at her resume, then back at her face. Older now, marked by experiences I knew nothing about, carrying burdens I couldn't see. That depends, I said carefully. Can you work under leadership that values fairness over favoritism? Can you follow a system where everyone actually does get equal treatment, regardless of who they are or where they came from? I can, she said quietly. I want to try. Good, I replied, because that's the only thing we build here, real fairness, real opportunity. When she left my office, Natalie slipped back in, uncertain and concerned. So, what do you think? Should I move her to the next round? I turned to look out the window. Rain streaked the glass in silver lines, just like that night 5 years ago, when my old life ended and my new one began in the cold darkness. Give her the position, I said finally. Natalie blinked in surprise. You're sure? I nodded slowly. Everyone deserves a chance, I murmured, more to myself than to her. Even the ones who once denied you yours. That evening, after the office had emptied and the city lights began to glow against the twilight sky, I stood alone by my window watching rain blur the world below. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably driving home, replaying every word we'd exchanged, maybe finally understanding that forgiveness doesn't always sound like mercy. Sometimes it just sounds like boundaries. I touched the frame on my wall, the $20 bill flattened and fragile under glass, a relic from another lifetime. They gave me a closed door, I whispered to my reflection. I built an open one. My phone buzzed on the desk, Mom calling. I watched it ring once, twice, 3 times, then pressed the silence button. The sound faded, replaced by the ambient hum of rain and distant traffic below. For the first time in 5 years, that silence didn't feel like absence or abandonment. It felt like peace. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, turning the rain on my office windows into liquid gold. For once, the city looked calm, like it had exhaled alongside me. Vanessa showed up for her first day 15 minutes early, carrying a new notebook instead of designer confidence. When I passed her in the hallway near the break room, she stopped and turned to face me. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you for giving me a chance." I nodded once. "Earn it," I replied. Not unkindly, but firmly. "That's all anyone asks here." She smiled faintly, like someone relearning a language they'd forgotten how to speak fluently. Throughout that day, I found myself watching her work. Quiet, deliberate, uncertain of her footing but genuinely trying. And somewhere deep inside me, something that had been clenched tight for 5 years finally began to unknot. Not forgiveness exactly, just release. Just the freedom to stop carrying something that had grown too heavy. Later, when the office emptied again and evening settled over Chicago, I stood at my desk looking at the 3 objects that had defined my journey. The hospital wristband reading unknown address, the $20 bill that represented rejection, and the Summit Operations Group logo framed between them. They had once marked failure, pity, and survival. Now they represented something else entirely. Legacy, purpose. Proof that the girl nobody wanted had become the woman everybody needed. I picked up the framed $20 bill, my reflection blending with the faded green ink in the glass. Unknown address was no longer who I was. I had roots now, deep ones. I had built something that mattered, something that would outlast me. I placed it back on the wall carefully, turned off the office lights, and whispered into the quiet darkness. The debt's been paid in full. That weekend, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I drove back to Springfield for the first time in 5 years. The town looked smaller somehow, like I'd outgrown it without realizing. The roads felt narrower. The buildings seemed worn and tired. But that bus stop, the one where everything had ended and somehow begun, was still there. Same dented metal bench, same flickering streetlight that never quite stayed lit. I parked my car and walked over slowly, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies and the framed $20 bill I'd kept on my office wall for so long. I laid the flowers gently on the bench where I'd spent 3 nights with pneumonia setting in, where a kind truck driver named Walter Green had saved my life with a cup of coffee and a phone call. Then I placed the framed 20 beside the flowers. "This is where they ended me," I whispered to the empty street, rain beginning to fall again in that familiar rhythm. "And this is where I began." The air smelled like wet pavement and possibility, like second chances and new beginnings. I stood there for a long time, not waiting for anyone to show up or expecting any grand revelation. Just listening to the rain hit the metal roof of the bus stop, making that same sound it had made 5 years ago. But it didn't sound cruel anymore. It sounded like music. When I finally turned to leave, dawn was breaking over Springfield, pale gold light spilling across the empty street, painting everything in soft forgiveness. I thought about Vanessa at her desk, working to prove herself. I thought about my parents, somewhere in this town, living with their choices. I thought about Dorothy at the shelter, Gloria at the diner, Kevin with his delivery trucks, Tom who'd given me that first real chance. And I thought about myself, The girl with the unknown address who became the woman who built an empire on fairness and second chances. As I drove back toward Chicago, watching Springfield disappear in my rearview mirror, I realized something important. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it never hurt. It means deciding that the pain doesn't get to write the rest of your story, because everyone deserves a future, even the ones who were told they didn't. My phone rang as I merged onto the highway, Mom calling, again. This time, I answered. Hello? There was silence on the other end. Then I heard her voice, older somehow, cracking with emotion. Rachel? Is that really you? It's me, Mom. More silence. Then the sound of crying. Quiet, broken, real. I'm so sorry, she whispered. We were so wrong. I was so wrong. I took a deep breath, watching the road stretch out ahead of me, full of possibility. I know, I said simply, and I forgive you, but things are different now. I'm different now. Can we see you? Can we talk? I thought about it for a long moment. Maybe, I said finally. When I'm ready. On my terms. Anything, she said quickly. Whatever you need. I'll call you when the time is right, I told her. But Mom, that door you closed 5 years ago? I've opened a new one, and this time I'm the one who decides who walks through it. When I hung up, the sun was fully risen, burning off the morning fog. The road ahead was clear and bright and mine. If this story found you, I hope it reminded you of something important. Your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see it. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just becoming so fully yourself that their rejection becomes irrelevant. Share this story if it spoke to you. You're not alone.